7 in the series on the power play are the Capitals. And it's fed to Kuznetsov, save, rebound, score! Oshie!
Watch what happens to TJ Oshie. Johnny on the spot, from his skate to his stick to the back of the net. Kuznetsov, the rolling put, Fleury fights it off, and then the nifty footwork by Oshie. Second chance opportunity. Great hand-eye coordination there from Oshie to be able to settle that puck down enough and just get it up and over the pad.
Yeah, TJ Oshie retired yesterday. Certainly not a surprise. That goal came in the first period of Game 4, nearly 7 years ago to the day. June 4th, 2018, the Caps in Game 4 at home, up 2-1 in that series at that time against Vegas. They went on to win that game 6-2. A few nights later, they were hoisting the Stanley Cup on the road in Las Vegas. Good morning, everybody, and so long to Oshie, who was a key piece to one of the most memorable sports springs in D.C. history, the only Stanley Cup the Caps have. Oshie in that playoff run, 21 points in 24 playoff games, 6 power play goals, led the league during that postseason, 2 game-winning goals. And remember, in the Eastern Conference Finals, when the Caps were down 3-2 against Tampa Bay, they needed to stay alive in Game 6, and Oshie provided 2 of the 3 goals in Game 6 to keep their season alive in that moment. Nobody will ever forget the moment he shared with his father on the ice in Vegas after winning the Cup. His father, Tim, had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's several years earlier. It was an emotional night for everybody. 16 years in the NHL, 9 of those here in Washington. Thank you and good luck to TJ Oshie in retirement. Max is a huge Caps fan, and I'll ask him sort of where he has him on the list of all-time Caps. Let me just mention to all of you that David Aldridge will be on the show to talk NBA Finals with us at 11. J.I. Halsell, longtime friend of the show, salary cap expert and NFL agent, will be on with us, and we'll talk about the kind of deal that Terry McLaurin might be looking for. We'll also talk about some of the other things that are going on in the NFL. And Dan Quinn is expected and scheduled to address the media before minicamp, mandatory minicamp, day number 1 begins at 1 o'clock today out in Ashburn. So we will carry that live when he speaks, most likely sometime during the 12 o'clock hour. So, Max, you're a huge Caps fan. You have followed this team for pretty much all of your very young life. I know Oshie's not up there with Ovechkin and Rod Langway and Peter Bondra and probably, a couple of the goalies. But, for someone like me who would have a hard time putting together, say, a top 20 list, where would Oshie be on the list?
Oshie's definitely up there. I've got
What's
him
up there?
It's top 10 for sure. At least in my lifetime. Because Ovechkin, Backstrom are obviously the 1-2. John Carlson's been around for forever, so he would fall into the 3 spot. Braden Holtby, again, up there. A lot of my guys come from the 2018 team, but at the same time, they're guys who have been around or were with this team for a good majority of their career, if not all of it. So, yeah, he's definitely in the top 10. Chris and I were having the discussion yesterday if he'll have his number retired or not. And he's given the magnitude that or the lengths that Monumental went to yesterday to put on the type of ceremony that they did for TJ, I think that's definitely in the cards. So he's top 10 for me, maybe even on the outskirts of the top 5, at least in terms of like my lifetime. Now you could go back and I could put Alex Semin on the list and guys from the old 2000s teams, but that 2018 team immediately like cemented a special place in my heart the second they went on that run. And it's just, yeah. So thank you, TJ. And he's partially responsible for one of the best nights of my life, which was not when the Caps won, but 2 nights after. They were at Cafe Milano in Georgetown. Yeah. And there were a bunch of people outside and we were all celebrating and all that. They brought the cup out and down to us. And like TJ was the one who handed it off like to the mob of people standing outside the restaurant. and the crowd went ballistic. Like some guy like lowered the Stanley Cup to my face so I could kiss it. Like it was a magical night, a magical moment, and TJ Oshie is the one that I have to thank for that.
Yeah, that's funny. I remember as a kid when the Bullets won the championship in 1978. There was a parade, and I do remember the Caps parade. I remember the Nats parade. They were great days, no doubt. And you're talking about, obviously, I mean, they celebrated that cup, and Ovechkin celebrated that cup, and by the way, totally deserved. But I remember that literally the Bullets players were on buses where you had to now I didn't get close to the buses, but you had to reach up to sort of grab onto Elvin Hayes's or Wes Unseld's hand to shake them as they were parading down in big buses. That makes no sense when you think about it. There should have been a parade, and there should have been open cars and whatever. Parades have been great. Super Bowl champion parades tend to be bad weather parades, and we've had a few of those, but you got to go a long way back. All right, well, good luck to TJ Oshie, and 2018 was certainly magical, and he will never be forgotten for being a big part of that. I wanted to just mention a couple of things because, man, there was a lot of follow-up to yesterday's show where we talked about Jaden Daniels, per Pro Football Focus, being ranked as the 6th best quarterback heading into 2025. The 5 in front of him, Mahomes, followed by Burrow, followed by Jackson, Allen, and then Jalen Hurts. And I said, I don't see how you would, put Jalen Hurts in front of Jaden Daniels. And many of you pushed back and said, well, Jalen Hurts has been to the Super Bowl twice, and he's won a Super Bowl. I would just say to you, well, Jaden Daniels has only played one season, and he got to the NFC Championship game. And Jalen Hurts, his first year of starting, they got to the playoffs and lost in the first round. But anyway, this from Derek. Derek writes, Kevin, you keep saying that Jaden is a top 5 QB in the league. One season just isn't enough to say that. Let's see it another year, and then we can talk. This from Paul. Kevin, Jaden's not top 5. He's barely top 10. Here are 9 who nobody is trading to Washington for Jaden Daniels: Jackson, Mahomes, Burrow, Allen, Stafford, Herbert, Hurts, Goff, and Dak. Yeah, okay. Dallas would run to the league office with the trade papers. Washington's agreed. We're trading Dak and a first to Washington for Jaden Daniels. Are you kidding me, Paul? Dak Prescott can't stay upright for a whole season. Come on, man. And Goff, please. Look, I think actually, when you look in the league at starting quarterbacks, if you're just going off of like potential, I would not have Goff or Dak or Hurts on this list. I am, I see what Justin Herbert is capable of. Sure, I get it. And, there would probably be some people who are Chargers fans, if there are any Chargers fans, that might say, yeah, I'm going to stick with this guy. It's still early, and this guy's big, and he's strong. He hasn't done it at all when it's mattered, but I'm going to stick with him because the other guy was great for 1 year, but it was just 1 year. Okay, I guess I could see that. I could even see somebody in Jacksonville saying, you know what? I like our guy. Trevor Lawrence is ridiculously talented, and he's got a shot with the right kind of coaching and the right kind of stuff around him. I cannot personally see it with Dak or Hurts or Goff. Goff is phenomenal at what he does, okay, which is if you have the right system and if you put really good players around him, he is going to be successful. There are guys like that in the league we've seen. One of those guys, who, Kirk Cousins, and he can be very effective. There's no chance that if you were a Lions fan and you had a chance for Jaden Daniels, you saw it up close and personal in the postseason, what he's capable of doing. Like, there's no way a Tua or who else? A Baker Mayfield.
Jordan Love.
No way those teams. Who?
A Jordan Love.
a Jordan Love. I mean, I'm a big Jordan Love fan. I think there's like a big Jordan Love run coming at some point. Although the team around him is not, they're not doing a great job.
Yeah.
But I just, no. I know it's early, and I know it's crazy to talk this way. I've said this multiple times as we were going through the season, because I think, at 7-2, I was like, you guys, we know it's over. Like, the decision is in. The ballots have been counted. He's elite. It didn't take long. It was like what game did they get to 7-2? Because then they lost the next 3 games after that. The Giants on the road. He was incredible. He had some incredible throws in that game, if you recall. And they won that game to get to 7-2, and that was a week after the Hail Mary. And then, they lost to Pittsburgh, Philly, and Dallas. And the Dallas game in particular was not, a super impressive performance until the end. But I remember at 7-2 going, they got it. They got it right. It's over. This guy right now is playing at an elite level. If you didn't know that he was a rookie, you would say he's the best or one of the 3, 4, or 5 best quarterbacks in the NFL. And then, they lost the 3 games and then obviously got it rolling again down the stretch. I mean, the game against Philly and Atlanta, the Atlanta overtime drive is epic. And then what he did in the postseason. I know it's only 1 year. I know. I get it, but this idea that like the league's going to figure him out, figure what out? What did he do that was like a major flaw? Nothing is the answer. And he has so many tricks in that bag. I can't wait to see year 2. I think the only thing, knock on wood for the, 1,000th time since they drafted him, he just has to stay healthy. And, he got banged up last year, missed most of that Carolina game, came back, and that's the key. If this guy stays upright and plays 17 games, for the next 5-6 years, he's going to be at the very top. I believe that. I got this yesterday from Carter C. Carter C. wrote the following to me, and it was interesting because I actually think it's something worth at least chatting about. Carter C. wrote, Kevin, any chance the team can't afford to sign Terry McLaurin? And then he added 2 winking emojis after that. So I actually thought that was an interesting take. And Carter C., I don't know if you are an in-the-know person, and that's why you were giving me the winking emojis or not, because I don't know who you are and I don't know if you actually know something or not. But whether you do or don't, it's actually an interesting thing to consider because we know what they had to do to buy this team. And by the way, that's not even 2 years ago at this point. It was end of July 2023. So we're not even 2 years since a $6 billion purchase of this football team where Josh Harris and company needed 20-plus limited partners to push it over the finish line. And forever we'll be, grateful to what he did and the group that came together to buy the team from the guy that had held it hostage for 24 years. But think about the massive expenditures since they took the team over. And all of them much appreciated because that stadium was falling apart, the existing stadium. They've spent, $75 million plus, maybe up to $100 million at this point, just to make that stadium out in Landover, first of all, safe, because it wasn't safe. Railings were falling on players, pipes were bursting, sewage was, seeping through seats and sections of the stadium. The thing was a disaster. And they had to spend, millions just to get the thing back up to code. And they went beyond that to make it a pleasant experience, or as pleasant as you can make that experience. There is the coming expenditures, big expenditures, RFK, new stadium, right? And then if you look ahead just to 2027, you've got a Jaden Daniels contract. This time next year, we will have been talking about an extension more likely than not for Laramie Tunsil, who will only have 1 year left on his deal a year from now. Keep in mind, they have not signed player-wise. They have not had an output in terms of investment into a player like they will have into Terry when this deal gets done, and I do believe it'll get done. This will be the biggest football team investment they've made since purchasing the team. They signed Sam Cosmi to a contract last year. It was 4 years, $74 million, $42 million guaranteed, $20 million at signing. Kinlaw was $30 million guaranteed when they signed him in this offseason. That was the biggest expenditure they made in the offseason. Last year, remember, it was a bunch of one-year deals, a couple of multi-year deals. Also looking forward, there are other players like Frankie Louvu. You're probably going to want to sign him, and he's probably going to be able to command a pretty sizable deal. There's the possibility of a Debo lighting it up this year and trying to compete with other teams for him. I don't believe that they can't afford it. But keep in mind, to sign Terry, this is the biggest single player investment. It's a deal that will be somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 million plus in aggregate, probably close to $120 million in aggregate, with, roughly $70 million guaranteed. Maybe 40 to 50 at signing. Maybe, another 20 to 30 that needs to go into escrow. You've got to account for that, even though a lot of teams don't actually do that. This will be the biggest commitment to a player that they have made since buying the team. And in the back of their minds, as they are planning, they understand that 2 years from now, and it will have already gotten done, I would assume, when they first can extend Jaden Daniels once the season ends in 2026 and we get into the offseason of 2027, it's going to be the biggest contract ever given to any player in the history of the franchise. And, that's going to come a year after they're probably going to have to extend Tunsil with a big deal, this time next year. And who knows what else is coming down the line. And then, RFK, and I know there are funding mechanisms for that stadium, and it's not going to require billions of dollars right now. Understood. It's just, I don't think they'd have a difficult time. I think the issue, I think it's interesting just to consider what the financial, situation is. And anybody would understand. Remember, they didn't get that deal done in Philadelphia for the 76ers. It was going to require too much, out of pocket, not enough in taxpayer funding. So they bailed on that. I don't know anything. Okay. But I thought it was interesting. It was an interesting email to read from somebody because I hadn't given that thought, but give it some thought because it is going to be the biggest player investment they've made since they took over the team. And let's face it, and all, thanks to Josh Harris and Mitch Rales and Magic Johnson and Mark Ein and all of the limited partners, the investments they have made since the big one, $6 billion, taking our nightmare and sending it to the UK. Because that, will never be able to pay back in gratitude. That was not an easy purchase. That was a big, big number. That was a number that was daunting for this group. Personally, I think the Terry situation it's a combination of what we first talked about last week when the report came out about the frustration on his end. It is that he is entering a season in which he will turn 30 years old very early in the season. I think it's September 15th. You're not paying anybody in life really for what they've done. You're paying them, you're compensating them for what they will provide and what they will produce moving forward. So he's going to play all of these, years on his new deal in his 30s, his early 30s, but his 30s. And then you go to the conversation, and I know for some reason some of you really are uncomfortable with this conversation, but you need to get over it. He's not elite. He's great. He is certainly in that, I would say, that second tier after Jefferson and Chase. If you want to throw A.J. Brown and his dominance at times into that group, I mean, that's what PFF did. But there's 8, 9, 10 guys. If you threw them into a hat and you picked out any of those names, you'd be thrilled with any of those guys after a Chase and a Jefferson, and maybe an A.J. Brown, and he's in that group, but he's not an elite, take the game over kind of guy. He's not a $35 million to $40 million guy. He's not. He is probably around $30 million. And if he wants a couple million more to push him into the top 3 or the top 4, the top 5, with the combination of age, et cetera, that may be where the rub is. I still think, as we sit here on the first day of mandatory minicamp, and we'll start getting reports coming in from the people that are out there about who's there. We know Tunsil arrived, and Max will be keeping an eye on who's there and who isn't, as I will. The Lattimore and Terry, are the two. We know that Tunsil's in town. Do we know anything else?
Lattimore is in town, and Terry will not be participating in minicamp.
But is he going to be there?
That I don't know. I'm going to need to do.
He shouldn't participate in minicamp.
Yeah, especially if you're holding
until
out.
This deal's done.
Yeah.
TJ Watt's not participating in Pittsburgh's minicamp, I heard this morning.
Mm-hmm.
So he shouldn't. And he didn't 3 years ago because he was in the midst of a contract negotiation. So he did not participate in mandatory minicamp and got fined. He'll get fined again for this because he is under contract. That's what, I remember reading at the end of last week, people, saying you can't let Terry leave. There's no leaving. Okay. He's under contract for 2025. It's just that he's got 1 year left on that contract. And if you want Terry McLaurin beyond 2025, which I think this organization should want Terry McLaurin beyond 2025, now is the time to extend him. You don't let him get into a season in which he is then sniffing the beginning of an opportunity to hit the open market. Of course, Washington could always use the franchise tag. Terry's underpaid right now. There's no doubt, but he did his deal 3 years ago. And you know what? When this deal gets done, there will be people that will say he's overpaid, but that won't last long. That'll last a full year. And then there will be 3 new guys that pass him because that's the way it works in the NFL. Today's overpayment is tomorrow's bargain. I think they'll get it done. I think they'll get it done before training camp. But I do kind of feel for the delicate part of this from the team standpoint. They just can't set precedents of, well, he's not only a really good player, he's a great guy. He's perfect for the culture. But he's going to be 30, and we're going to be paying him for his early 30s. And, yeah, all due respect, because he's a really good receiver and he's super important for us. He's not Justin Jefferson. He's not Jamar Chase. He just isn't. But he's really good, So it'll get done. I'd be shocked. I'd be shocked if Terry McLaurin is playing against the Giants on opening day at Northwest Field with just 1 year left on his contract, because that is the worst case. Understand that is the worst case. There's no holding out. Terry wouldn't have the accrual of another season to get closer to free agency. It would all get, halted, and he wouldn't get paid, and he'd be getting fined. He's going to play for this team in 2025. They're not trading him. No chance. What do they have? They don't have anything without him. He's the second most important player on offense. Certainly no worse than the third if Tunsil's all of a sudden become the second most important player on offense. He's a top 5 player on the team. They're trying to win the Super Bowl right now. They're not trying to get to the playoffs as a wild card team, finishing 9-8 or 10-7, which you'd need him to do that as well. You got a chance to compete deep into the postseason for a second straight year and potentially go win a Super Bowl. in 2025. You're not doing that without your best receiver and one of the top 10 receivers in the league. All right. We got a lot to get to on the show today, including, as I mentioned, David Aldridge. J.I. Halsell will join us. J.I.'s great on salary cap stuff, contract stuff. So we'll get to all of that and more when we come back. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the Team980.com.
and sorry if I'm jumping the gun here a bit, but there's a report that you're looking into a contract extension with Maryland.
Yeah, I'm not right now. What I can tell you is Damon Evans and I, he hired me. We're on the same page of what we want to do for this program, what we want to do for this university. His focus and my focus are exactly the same. So our focus right now is strictly the NCAA tournament and this team. But all I can say to that is that me and Damon are on the same page, and we always have been.
That was Kevin Willard before before Maryland's first tournament game against Grand Canyon back in March of NCAA tournament time. Why am I playing that? Because there was a story yesterday in the Baltimore Sun written by Taylor Lyons. It was an in-depth, titled Inside Kevin Willard and Damon Evans, The Chaotic Exits, with a headline, Maryland Got Screwed. A subheading, There Was Always a Rift Between the Former Men's Basketball Coach and Athletic Director, a Close Partner of Willard Says. So there you go. I didn't talk about this yesterday because I didn't have a chance to read it. It came out during the show, read it afterwards. So I want to weigh in on this story. First of all, let me just say this. For those of us that, and there are many of us, that were familiar with the Maryland situation, and the Maryland athletic department situation over the last many years, none of this came as like shockers, at any point, whether it was Kevin Willard, announcing on behalf of Damon Evans that he was leaving in that lengthy press conference before the NCAA tournament started, and that, that there were problems between the athletic director and the athletic director's, associates and the basketball program. It was two coaches. At the time I said, look, we've now had two pretty damn good basketball coaches. I know many of you disagree with me, but it's my opinion. In Mark Turgeon and Kevin Willard, both decide that this wasn't where they wanted to be. So, it was a look in the mirror moment. And we talked a lot about that. And in reading this story, there is a lot here that's very familiar to many of us. And there are a couple of things in the story that are very interesting. Let me just say this, big picture. Anybody that goes all in on one side or the other doesn't really know much about this situation. This is the typical, his side, her side, the truth lies somewhere in between. Whenever you get a breakup, and you hear his side and you hear her side and they're the opposites. And then you're just like, you know what? Experience tells me that the truth lies somewhere in between. And I think that's what this situation is. Although there was a couple of, I think, a few reveals in this story. This is something that I don't think everybody knew, but there was certainly an understanding that there was some early frustration. But at the very beginning of the story, Kevin Willard, Taylor Lyons writes, Kevin Willard's frustrations with Maryland dated to his first week on the job in 2022. Quote, this from Harry Geller, who worked closely with Willard and founded two name, image, and likeness collectives that funded Maryland men's basketball. He said for this story, quote, you can quote me directly on this. This is what he always said to me. One of his quotes was, I've never seen a place that cares less about winning in basketball than this. From the first week I met him, he was unhappy, closed quote. I knew that Mark was very unhappy with Damon Evans for the last several years of his tenure. I know that Kevin wasn't thrilled with Damon Evans or the athletic department, and I don't think he was the only one. But I didn't realize that essentially the first week on the job, he's like, what did I do? The story continues. Willard's instantly fractured relationship with his own athletic department splintered from there over the next 3 years, developing into a cold resentment for former athletic director Damon Evans that led to a messy breakup and a dark cloud that hovered over the men's basketball team's drama-filled run to the Sweet 16 of the NCAA tournament. The Baltimore Sun contacted more than a dozen key decision makers in and around Maryland athletics. Those who granted interviews with the Sun described a men's basketball coach and an athletic director tandem that never coalesced. Willard, always asking for more, loathed Evans over a belief that he could have done more to make his program competitive, despite being given almost everything he requested. Evans, who rarely said no, thought Willard's complaints were unfair. And the story continues. So that's one, is that from week one, at least according to Harry Geller, Kevin was unhappy. Kevin Willard was unhappy. Number two, in terms of a reveal, is this. Because this is, this falls under the his side, her side, the truth lies somewhere in between. Kevin has been absolutely vilified for the way he exited the job. And I said during that time, and I will continue to say today, yeah, there are two sides to this story. And yes, it could have been handled better. I don't think he should have said what he said in those press conferences. I don't think he should have said what he said to me when I had him on after, that first round where they, had the big second round win on the Derek Queen buzzer beater. When he said, if I get everything I want, I'm staying. Because from my sources at the time, they ultimately did give him almost everything he wanted. But there was one thing that he could not be sure of. But there's a part of this story that I think is very important for Maryland basketball fans to understand. Because this is the part where everybody that believes he was always gone, I think, are wrong. So, what's Jack Litch's first name? He's a real estate agent, big Maryland guy. God, I'm blanking. I'm so sorry about that. Rick, right? Rick Jack Litch, who's part of the collective with Harry Geller and others. He was quoted as saying the following in this story. I wouldn't be surprised if Willard had a handshake deal with Villanova in February, said Jack Litch, the former president of the Terrapin Club. But then he says this. Now, I think if Damon had been there, then Kevin would have gotten his contract finished and he'd still be at Maryland. He told me then he was hoping to have it done in the next couple of days. A week later, the rumors started coming out about Damon leaving, and then Kevin had no one to negotiate with. There wasn't a commitment he thought he could count on. Again, two sides to every story. And even this, who knows how truthful it is, how exaggerated it is, how spot on it is. But I thought and said at the time, while he didn't handle it well, it was a look in the mirror moment for the university. And oh, by the way, yes, there are a lot of people working to make Kevin comfortable with the offer for a contract extension and some of the commitments that they are making. But there's no athletic director, and no matter how much he loathed Damon Evans, the devil he knew in the moment was better than the one that he did not know. So in Jack Litch's comment, now, I think if Damon had been there, then Kevin would have gotten his contract finished and he'd still be at Maryland, is what I believe to be true. That if Damon Evans didn't leave, they would have gotten a contract extension done and Kevin would have still been the head coach at Maryland. And that sort of bucks up against two things. One, he loathed Damon, but again, the devil you know. And two, when Jack Litch says, well, I wouldn't be surprised if he had a handshake deal with Villanova in February. Well, both things can't be true. He can't have a handshake deal with February with Villanova, and then you think he would have stayed had Damon Evans remained the athletic director, because they were close to getting a contract extension done. So they were close to getting a contract extension done to lock him in to stay. He was planning on signing that had the athletic director turmoil not taken place. I believe that to be true. Again, do I think he handled it well in the moment. Do I think he could have handled it better? I do. And I'll never come off that. I don't think that, throwing Damon under the bus before that first game against Grand Canyon made a lot of sense. It brought a lot of attention to what a lot of people knew, which was the overall dysfunction of Maryland's athletic department. But at the same time, they were working on a contract extension, and then the athletic director up and left. And he did not have an AD. So one thing they couldn't promise him as they all got together and came to him to give him what he wanted to hopefully stay, they couldn't tell him who he'd be working for. I think there's a lot more to this story. Again, probably didn't handle it well. Probably should have just said, not answering any questions about anything other than Grand Canyon, other than Florida, their opponents through the tournament. That's all I'm talking about. And by the way, that wouldn't have been received well either. There's no way you can leave in most instances and have people supportive of you. But what he did was, went a bit rogue, went way too public in some of the things he said, and he would have been better off staying silent, at least among, the people in the business that know. I'm not talking about the fan base. But I thought that was a very interesting reveal and really sort of syncs up with some of the things that I've heard in the moment and have heard since, that they were close to getting a deal done, which really is in conflict with, he knew all along he was going to Villanova. Maybe that was always the fallback. Maybe there was hey, I'm there if I don't get a deal worked out in terms of an extension. But I think to say that he was never willing to sign an extension to stay at Maryland, I think that's inaccurate. Lastly, I thought it was interesting. And by the way, overall, and this was something we talked about in the moment, overall, what happened ultimately, I hope and I believe, has made Maryland a better job than it was before all of this happened. And I think Buzz Williams could be a significant beneficiary of all of this. But lastly, I thought there was an interesting reveal about Jacoby Gillespie. Jacoby Gillespie, according to this story, has not been paid the full amount of the NIL contract he signed before last season with one of Maryland's collective partners. His father, Byron, told the Baltimore Sun that he hadn't been paid and added that Jacoby was promised he'd still receive his monthly checks regardless of whether he transferred. The collective now says it will not pay out the remainder of the agreement after he transferred to Tennessee in April. And Gillespie said, quote, "When Willard left, they pretty much quit paying all the players. We're fighting that right now." Harry Geller told Jacoby's mom that he would get the money. Then all of a sudden he's gone. And this Simon guy, that's G-Roy Simon, who played wide receiver at Maryland, and G-Roy now is a big part. He's kind of the GM. And that's another thing that was made clear in this story, is that Maryland was one of the few major D1 schools that had not hired a GM to sort of manage all of this. But Jacoby's mom told Geller told Jacoby's mom that he would get the money. Then all of a sudden he's gone. And this Simon guy, G-Roy Simon, since he took over, we've been into it with him. There were players that did get their money and players that didn't and are still fighting for it. It kind of makes it look like Willard was right. Maybe they don't have the money, closed quote. So again, I know that this is not for everybody. This is very much a Maryland, sports, Maryland basketball kind of a thing, but it was a chaotic, couple of weeks. That is for sure. And it's a chaotic couple of weeks that, will be remembered. And there's a lot that wasn't really known, certainly by the fan base and many people in the media as well, that maybe they got a little bit more clarification on. I think and thought at the time, and still to this day, that two things are true simultaneously. Kevin could have handled it better, and yet the situation was one in which it was a look in the mirror moment for Maryland. And what we have found out through this story, which, I have learned, since all of this went down, is that they were very close to signing Kevin to a contract extension, and he was very close to signing it. And if the athletic director that he loathed, even though he was the devil he knew, had stayed, he'd probably still be the basketball coach if he had stayed at least through the contract extension signing. But he didn't. All right, news on Terry McLaurin when we come back.
All right, minicamps are underway across the NFL. Some notable minicamp absences include Washington's Terry McLaurin and Pittsburgh's TJ Watt. Both are attempting to secure extensions. Laramie Tunsil and Marshawn Lattimore are both present in Ashburn for Commanders minicamp. And the Florida Panthers last night boat raced the Edmonton Oilers in a physical and chippy game that ended by a score of 6-1. Murray State, they beat Duke in the Durham Super Regional to advance to their first Men's College World Series. And tonight, the Nats will take on the Mets at 7:10. Mackenzie Gore expected to take the bump. Nats on deck with Charlie and Dave at 6:40. This update is sponsored by the Team 980 YouTube page. Just open the app, type in the Team 980, and hit subscribe. Kevin Sheehan is live from 10 to 1, and Craig Hoffman from 4 to 7. Don't forget to like the stream and turn on notifications to stay up to date on all things DC sports. And that's what's trending.
me and Terry got a good relationship outside of football. So, obviously he got to handle what he has to handle, and but that doesn't change anything. The fact that he's part of our brotherhood. We know Terry's working and everything, so we got to get better, and he knows he got to get better each and every day.
Jaden Daniels last week talking about Terry McLaurin, who is a holdout from the team's mandatory minicamp today. John Keim writes, he's seeking a contract extension. He did not report to the team's mandatory minicamp. By the way, he's the only one. Lattimore and Tunsil are both there. He skipped, the voluntary OTA practices as well. So this could be, if he misses all 3 days, a fine worth up to $104,000 plus. He can be fined, John writes in his story on ESPN.com, $17,462 for missing day one, $34,925 for the second missed day, and $52,381 for the third day. There you go. And I think, I believe that, the last time the CBA was put together, that it's harder and harder now for players to be essentially refunded or have the slate wiped clean on fines. I think somebody else probably has exactly what that got updated to in the last CBA. Let's hit a real quick. What do you got? So if you guys haven't seen this, one of the greatest catches in a Major League Baseball game last night in Anaheim, A's and Angels, center fielder Denzel Clark for the Oakland A's takes a deep shot from Shawnell, I think his name is, for the Angels, and this thing is headed over the center field wall, and he gets a running start into it. He leaps up onto the wall. His left hand with his glove on it, he's a right-hander, reaches over the wall and then down, like it's almost falling to the ground on the other side of the wall, but he's able to haul it in, and then in one motion springs off the wall back into the field of play with the ball in hand. It is truly one of the great catches you will ever see by an outfielder on a ball that was certainly gone. It was home run robbery, Denzel Clark for the Oakland Athletics. All right, when we come back, David Aldridge, I was wrong. He's joining us at noon. That was my fault. Up next, our guy J.I. Halsell was on with me yesterday in my podcast. And J.I. is an NFL agent. He is a salary cap expert. And he weighed in on the Terry McLaurin situation and a lot of other situations, including Trey Hendrickson and others around the league. You'll hear that next. Minicamp day number 1 will get underway this afternoon at 1 o'clock. Dan Quinn supposed to speak in the 12 o'clock hour, probably close to 12:30-ish. We'll try to carry that live. David Aldridge is going to join us before that. We'll talk some NBA Finals with David. J.I. Halsell is a DMVer. And a longtime salary cap expert and NFL agent. He had a couple of players picked in the most recent draft. Always love to have J.I. on to talk about contract stuff and salary cap stuff because he has a very keen understanding of all of it. I had him on my podcast yesterday to really talk about the Terry situation, but we ended up talking about a lot more than that. But we started with Terry's going to be a holdout from mandatory minicamp more likely than not. He had expressed frustration last week, or certainly there were reports that he was frustrated. And I asked J.I. to weigh in on his sort of overall thoughts on the Terry situation contract-wise here in D.C.
The challenge for him is he's clearly number one wide receiver, even with the arrival of Deebo Samuel. I think the challenge, though, for him is he's 29, right? And I think what you see in Terry McLaurin's scenario is a situation really not too different than Chris Godwin minus the injury part of the Chris Godwin scenario, right? So when I think about, okay, you've got a number one wide receiver, but he's 29 years old, and we know that the number one wide receiver market is in excess of $30 million per year. You're the Washington Commanders. How do you find some middle ground to give him a market appropriate deal, given the fact, though, that, again, he's 29 years old?
Okay. So before we get to what you think that looks like, what do you think of that report last week? Is that just an agent trying to create leverage?
Well, yes, it is likely coming from the agent trying to create leverage by saying, that his client is disappointed with kind of the pace and tenor of the conversation. But, I mean, look, again, he is exactly what you want in the locker room. He's exactly what you want from a culture building standpoint. The fact that, that we are here. Now, granted, look, we've still got another, month and a half or so before we get to training camp. But the fact that it sounds like they're not further along in the contract conversation, I'm sure is frustrating for both Terry and his agent.
What do you make of just the Adam Peters 49ers experience and the reputation the 49ers have for, letting these things sort of drag on and getting them done at the 11th hour? Do you think some of that's in play right now?
Sure, without a doubt. I mean, that's the culture that Adam grew up in from a front office cap management standpoint. I think the key word that you mentioned there, though, is that ultimately the deals do get done. And I suspect that, won't be any different for Terry McLaurin, especially given who he is both on the field and in the locker room.
So, Terry, you mentioned 29. He'll be 30 when the season starts, or a week into the season. And you mentioned Chris Godwin. I think a lot of people listening would say immediately Terry's a lot better than Chris Godwin. I think Godwin's a good receiver. I think Terry would be ahead of Godwin. Godwin's always been a number 2 to Mike Evans when both have been healthy. But, given the age, and then what else is in play here? Like, from Terry's side and Terry's agent side, what do you think they're looking for?
I mean, they're obviously looking for a deal reflective of a number one wide receiver, regardless of what his age is, and that's a deal in excess of $30 million per year. If you're telling me that Brandon Ayuk can get $30 million per year, why can't Terry McLaurin get $30 million plus per year? And the club will say, well, Brandon Ayuk's a lot younger than Terry McLaurin, so we don't feel comfortable paying a receiver who will be 30 years old in the middle of this season a number in excess of 30. So now you have to start looking at, okay, well, what's the lower tier number one wide receiver market, the high end number 2 wide receiver market, coupled with the fact that we just gave Deebo Samuel a reworked deal that has a 1-year average per year value of 24 or just under 24 million.
Right.
So, those are all of the different parameters and considerations, right? T. Higgins is a number 2 wide receiver in Cincinnati and is making just under $29 million per year. And I'm not saying that Terry McLaurin is or is not T. Higgins, but again, T. Higgins is a number 2 wide receiver making 29. So therefore, if I'm Terry McLaurin, how can you tell me that I should make less than 29? So these are all of the different things that kind of come into play when we're trying to craft a win-win deal, both on the Washington side of this and the Terry McLaurin side of this.
Jay, I get into this a lot, especially this time of year and for the last few years when it comes to Terry. And that is, what is he really? To me, I've said this many times before, there is an elite group here of wide receivers. To me, it's Chase and Jefferson, and then we can start talking about tier 2 receivers. If you want to throw A.J. Brown into that tier 1, I don't think he's at their level, but I know some people will throw him into that level. How do you view the wide receivers and Terry's place among them?
No, I agree. He's not at the elite level, so he's not going to command $35 million plus per year. But like I said 2 seconds ago, if Brandon Ayuk is a $30 million per year wide receiver, then Terry McLaurin should be a $30 million per year wide receiver, just purely based upon just looking at players side by side.
Right.
T. Higgins is a number 2 wide receiver and is $29 million per year. Debo is 24. And then you got guys like Devontae Smith at 25. And so like that second tier of wide receivers is kind of in that 30 million per range. But again, the thing working against Terry McLaurin is the fact that he'll be 30 years old during the course of this season. So where's the middle ground? And there are other considerations structurally to kind of mitigate the risk for the club and for Terry to make more money. But I think from a pure APY standpoint, you're probably looking at a deal at the top end of 20 million per, 25 plus per year.
Yeah. I mean, I've suggested that it's got to be right around 30. It's not Jamar's 40. It's not Jefferson's 35. I don't even think because of the age, it's CD Lamb's 34 million or Metcalf's 33 or AJ Brown's 32. Right. I mean, but it's right around where, Tyreek Hill signed a deal, by the way, at 30 million per year, and they're basically the same age. And to your point, and I was a big Brandon Ayuk fan this time last year. He got injured, and the holdout was kind of contentious and a bit ugly. But I think Brandon Ayuk is a number 1 wide receiver in this league when healthy. We'll find out, in the years ahead. But to me, it just feels like 30 million a year. Do you think the team will go there? And just give me an idea of what you think the structure would be.
Yeah, I think if Terry absolutely needs to have $30 million per year attached to his contract, I think what you could see is similar to what I think it was the Raiders, Devontae Adams deal, definitely the Tyreek Hill Dolphins deal, where that last year of the deal is really inflated so that it gets the total value of the deal to a $30 million per year deal. But in reality, it's really more a 27.5, 28 per year deal over those first 2 or 3 years. I think I'm not too different than you. I don't know that he's a $30 million per year wide receiver, but I do think that he's a 28 or 29. And when we're talking about what's the difference there? I mean, you're talking about the difference of like $3 to $6 million over the total value of the deal. And Don't get me wrong, $3 to $6 million is a lot of money, but I do think that he's probably in that 28, 29 per year range, because I think T. Higgins is a great kind of barometer in that he is an elite number 2 wide receiver. And he's at $29 million per year. Terry McLaurin is a number 1 wide receiver, albeit going into his age 30 season. And I think those two dynamics kind of offset each other, which then say Terry McLaurin is probably around T. Higgins' $29 million per year.
Prediction: will it get done before camp?
I think so. It has to get done. I think Adam Peters has seen the importance of having kind of these pillar players in your locker room as you try to build culture, whether it was the George Kittles of the world when he was in San Francisco. Terry McLaurin is one of those types of guys from a locker room standpoint. And like a George Kittle, he is super productive on the field as well. So my sense is they get this deal done maybe just a little bit ahead of training camp so that it doesn't become a distraction as we go into camp. And my prediction is that, it's probably in that 28, 29 per year range.
All right, I want to ask you about a couple of other players. What do you think happens with Trey Hendrickson in Cincinnati?
That one's super contentious, right? And he's another player whose age is working against him, right? But he's still playing at a high level. This one, he could be this year's Hassan Reddick in that this one could drag into the regular season with missed games for him, missed game checks and fines. But I really do see this one potentially being the 2025 version of Hassan Reddick.
What do you think he deserves? Because he's a much better player than Hassan Reddick is as a pass rusher. He's a dominant pass rusher.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, but at the same time, he's not going to get elite edge money because of his age. He's 30 plus years old. And
so is Danielle Hunter.
And Daniel's still playing at a high level. I mean, just like Trey Hendrickson. And Houston reworked the deal that they just signed with him last offseason to reflect that.
Right.
So I say all that to say that, okay, why can't Cincinnati do that? Because Cincinnati has just a history of, quite frankly, being cheap with their contracts in terms of how they structure them and what the values are. And when they've just paid T. Higgins and just paid Jamar Chase, already paid the quarterback, at some point, you got to, skimp, for lack of a better word, somewhere else. And, for them, it might have been wise to trade Trey Hendrickson when they had the opportunity to so that he could go get this contract elsewhere. And that's not to say that won't happen down the road here. But he's deserving of a high-end edge contract, not elite because of the age.
You're better at this than I am, much better. If he did get traded, if I told you he got traded, let's just say before camp started or during camp, what do you think the compensation Cincinnati would accept is right now?
Look, they're in a tough spot just because the world knows that the player doesn't want to be there. The world knows that, they want him at a bargain basement price, but probably won't. He's not going to play under that. So therefore, they have no leverage when coming up with trade compensation. Now, given that he's an elite, or not an elite, he plays an elite position of edge rusher, an important position, I should say. Maybe it's a mid-round pick. Maybe it's a fifth-round pick. But it's not going to be like a top 100 pick, third-round pick or higher.
Really?
It's probably, it's just, if you want to go get a player and you know that there is angst between player and his current team, it really devalues what you can probably get.
Well, then there's no way they're trading him. There's no way, because they wanted a first and a night 2 pick before the draft.
Right. But now, this is where the other clubs start playing like, okay, you guys can live with this headache if you want to. We're going to start getting into training camp, and we're going to start getting into the part of camp where coaches just want to eliminate distractions, and this is going to be a big distraction that Zach Taylor's going to have to answer at every press conference. At some point, if you know you're not going to give the player the contract he wants, you got to get something in return. And it might be a 5th-round pick. But that's why I said 2 seconds ago, perhaps they should have moved on earlier, because then they would have probably gotten more in return via trade.
Do you have any idea what Nick Chubb got from the Texans?
I don't, but I would imagine it's probably something very close to the league minimum, just because
injuries.
The position he plays, because they already have Joe Mixon there, because it seems like he's still working back from the knee injury. My sense is it's probably a 1-year league minimum deal.
Do you think J.K. Dobbins is in that same boat?
Well, at least J.K. Dobbins, he was, when he was healthy last year in L.A., their primary back.
Yeah.
He beat out the Gus Bus to be the primary back there with the Chargers. So I think his calculus is slightly different, but It is just a function of where we are with the running back market from a supply and demand standpoint, that a good player like a J.K. Dobbins is still out there in free agency.
How do you think it works out in Buffalo with James Cook?
Yeah, so I actually just did an interview with our old buddy Ryan O'Halloran, who used to cover Washington for the Post, and he now covers the Bills. And I was talking with him about James Cook's situation. I think here's the thing about James Cook is that he's done it for 2 years in a row now in terms of being a Pro Bowl caliber running back. You know what you have in James Cook, both on the field and in the locker room. Those are the guys that you should reward as an organization, regardless of the position, right? And what I was telling to Ryan was that with James Cook, and you've seen this with a lot of the other running back deals as of late, they're only like 2 or 3 year extensions, right? And so maybe James Cook, who's also relative to the running back position, a little bit older, like he's going into his age 26 season here in 2025. So if you do a 2 year extension, if you're the Bills with James Cook, now you get him for age 26, 27, 28, the prime of his career as a running back. And I get James Cook's going to want some more security than that, like a longer deal. But the fact of the matter is, they're probably not. I think you could see a James Cook deal coming in at, say, $20 million total guaranteed on a 2 year extension. So the win for him is that he gets that kind of generational guaranteed money. But then for the Buffalo Bills, you're not having to pay him that guarantee as if, he's going to be on a 3 or 4 or 5 year extension. And then more importantly, mathematically, without going into all of the math, let's just say his deal was worth just under $13 million per year new money. When you factor in what he's supposed to make this year, which is a little over $5 million, you're actually going to end up paying him $10 million over the next 3 seasons, which is the same amount of money that the Vikings are paying Aaron Jones. So if you're the Buffalo Bills, if I can get James Cook at an Aaron Jones price for the next 3 seasons, you do that deal.
If I told you that, let's just say Trey Hendrickson re-signed in Cincinnati, but Washington added an edge pass rusher before the season started from the group of, let's just say, Clowney, Zadarius Smith, Judon, Von Miller. I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody else that's out there right now. Who do you think would make the most sense?
If Hendrickson was off the market?
Yes.
Yeah, all those guys you just listed are older.
Yeah.
Right? Especially when we talk about Clowney and Von Miller. Yeah, I don't love really any of those options, but I do understand the need in having to go get one. Von Miller's still a highly productive player when healthy, right? So perhaps Von Miller, but again, this is a guy who is going into like year 15 of his career at this juncture. So, but Von Miller, again, is still a highly productive player when healthy. So I would probably have to go with Von Miller of that group of aging edge players.
By the way, because you answered with Hendrickson being off the market first, if we said that it actually required to get Hendrickson a 3rd rounder and a player, say Johnny Newton, all right, would you do that deal if you're Washington? And then you got to pay him.
Yeah, and then you've got to pay him, right? I think you have to see. Okay, if they're not happy with their existing edge players, then yes. I think for a team that is on the cusp of being a Super Bowl contender and maybe winning a whole thing in this league, as the Eagles showed in the Super Bowl, you got to be able to rush the passer. Right, and Trey Hendrickson's a guy, in spite of his age, who can do that. I think if it requires giving up a young player like Newton and giving up a mid-round pick, like a 3rd round pick, I think you do that deal.
Did the Steelers get a good deal in Rodgers for what they paid?
In the short term, yes, but they still haven't solved their long-term quarterback issue, and maybe they went into it thinking, we don't really like this year's crop of quarterbacks in the draft, and we already went through the Kenny Pickett experience, so let's go ahead and let's run it with Aaron Rodgers this year with the eye towards going to get one of the young signal callers in next year's draft. But They definitely got a bargain basement deal. It's being reported that he got about $13 million as the base value of the deal. That can go up to $19 million for a starting caliber quarterback. That's a significant bargain for the Steelers. Obviously got a lot that comes with him, but I think some of that is overstated, quite frankly. But yeah, no, they've managed their quarterback room really interesting the past couple of off seasons. When you think about last year, the two-headed quarterback room of Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, who they got both of those guys at value, and then now to get an Aaron Rodgers at a value as well. Again, great short-term solutions, but they still need to find a long-term answer.
All right, two more for you. Number one is just because I'm curious, especially after Rodgers signed in Pittsburgh, which was expected. You think Kirk Cousins just backs up Penix Jr. in Atlanta this year? It doesn't seem like there's a landing spot for him.
Yes. I think that from a Falcons front office perspective, you just view Kirk Cousins as a expensive insurance policy. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that concept. Now, the price point, yeah, it is a little steep given what you paid him last year in free agency. But, yeah, he's an expensive insurance policy at the most important position on the roster. And if you are the Atlanta Falcons, you made it very clear from a roster building standpoint, you wanted to be very, very secure and strong at quarterback. And that's why you go and sign Kirk Cousins last offseason and go draft Michael Penix in the first round. And so you are comfortable with, having an expensive insurance policy if that means that we've got the quarterback room solidified.
All right, last one. After Barkley's contract last year in Philadelphia, I want to know if you have thoughts on the next running back that will sign a blockbuster deal that will exceed Barkley's, 20 to 21 million a year.
I mean, it could be Bijan.
Right.
I think it just depends upon, does he have that true breakout season, which he hasn't yet, right? And I think when you're the Atlanta Falcons, talking about Falcons again, I don't think that they've shown necessarily, like, they're not adverse to investing money into their guys. Now, they're going to have to pay Drake London as well at some point here, too. But, Bijan, I think, just off the top of my head, is probably the next guy. We'll see kind of where the Kyren Williams deal lands, because that one seems like it's pretty close, but it's not going to be an elite deal in the Saquon Barkley neighborhood. I think just because of his pedigree and if he can have a truly breakout season, Bijan might be the guy.
That makes sense to me. I was going to say either Bijan or Gibbs. I mean, we're still a couple of years away from Gibbs, but he might be the one right after Bijan.
Well, he's going in this is year 3 of Jahmyr Gibbs in Detroit. I think some will say, and look, he has shown that he can be the bell cow when David Montgomery is hurt. They've had some of those games, right? But particularly if they can win it all. Like that kind of honeymoon after winning tends to allow guys to get paid. And so I don't think you're wrong in terms of Jahmyr Gibbs could also be another one of those guys. I think, he and Bijan might be the two guys who, if the stars align, could get to that 20+ million.
Right. I was confused there they got picked in the same year, in the same draft, by the way, both in the first round. Thanks for doing this as always. Glad you're well. Happy birthday to you again.
I appreciate it, Kev.
Yeah, that's J.I. Hallsell at Salary Cap 101 on X on Twitter. So the contract situation with Terry is, currently one of the top storylines entering this summer. Today's day one of mandatory minicamp. What's interesting is to consider what's next, because the answer to that, I think, is revealing as to what kind of roster Washington really has. I'll explain when we return. It's the Kevin Sheehan Show on the Team 980 to Team980.com. Don't forget, we're on the Team 980's YouTube channel as well. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. That is good for us. So let's assume that a deal for Terry McLaurin gets done, in the next couple of months before training camp, sometime during camp. Let's just assume that happens. What's next after that? This is an exercise that I went through last night that is very revealing of the roster. Now, not a lot of this is going to come as a big surprise to many of you. But it is interesting to kind of see what they've been doing here. They went into year one in this recalibration mode. Then they sort of recalibrated the recalibration by understanding they had gotten Jaden right, and they have sent a lot of draft picks, 8 in total for 3 players. They perhaps have been interested in a guy like Trey Hendrickson. But at the same time, when you consider this Terry deal, and then you're like, okay, well, what's next? What you start to get a picture of is what this roster is. This roster right now, first of all, did you know this? Did you know right now, of the 90 players that Washington essentially has under contract, heading into this summer, Washington's average age is the oldest in the NFL at 27.7 years old. That's according to Spot Rack, a big salary cap tracker, contract tracker. The next oldest team isn't even close at 26.9 years old. So there's an 8/10 of a difference between Washington at number 1 as the oldest roster right now. We don't know what the final 53 will look like, but right now they have the oldest 90 in the league. Now, Wagner and Ertz obviously skew that. So does Tress Way. Washington has 3 extraordinarily old players on their roster, and that helps, skew that very high, average that out very high. Is it a big deal? You know why it's not a big deal? Is that most of these players are on 1-year deals. They could completely flip this next year by signing all young players. And that's where, when you start to look into what's next after Terry, it's just interesting. First of all, for those that don't know, and I've talked about this a lot, but if you're hearing this for the first time, they can't extend Jaden Daniels now. They can't go to him early and pay him. The collective bargaining agreement rules stipulate that draft pick contracts can't be renegotiated until the conclusion of a player's 3rd NFL regular season. So Jaden can't even be approached on a new deal until after the 2026 season, so after next year, which means the earliest Jaden could, have the truck backed up, in front of his house and end up being the highest paid player in the league, which is a distinct possibility when we get to the offseason of 2027. They can't do that until then. And by the way, they don't have to do it then. Remember, they have the 5th-year option on Jaden Daniels' rookie contract, which they can't exercise until the same moment in which they could actually offer him an extended deal, and that is the offseason of 2027. So all of their rookies that have been drafted in the last 2 years, you can't deal with until after next, for the guys that were picked in 2023, for the guys that were picked in 2024, not until after the 2026 season, and obviously for the guys that were picked this year, not until after the 2028 season. But what you start to see when you start to look towards like what's next, and you look at Washington's roster, is the way it's been constructed. I know we've talked a lot about this, but then you get into, okay, well, what does that mean in terms of, where they are in paying players and finding those cornerstones of the franchise that they're going to pay and then build around? Well, again, number 1 is the quarterback. Can't touch him until 2027. Number 2 is somebody like Terry McLaurin, but he is getting into his 30s. We've talked a lot about that. And this is, an assumption that it gets done. What happens after Terry's deal? What's next? Jaden's still a couple of years away. What's next? Well, you have a lot of 1-year contracts, right? A lot of guys on one-year deals, probably more than any team in the league in terms of one-year deals. By the way, that's been advantageous for the team as it relates to cash outlay, right? Because the aggregate value of these deals isn't significant when they're just one-year deals. That could play into what we talked about last hour about, are they hamstrung at all from a cash standpoint? I don't believe so, but I had somebody ask me as to whether or not that could be playing into the Terry McLaurin situation. But in terms of what's next after Terry, you look at the guys that are, first of all, probably worthwhile signing to contract extensions. So where do you go? You can't touch any of the rookies. You can't touch any of the second-year players. You can't touch any of the players. And really, when you look at the last two drafts, right, you're not touching anybody from the 24 draft until after the 26 season. Nobody from this draft until after the 27 season. And from the 23 draft, the only player really on the roster that you might have to deal with when this season is over, even though he's under contract for another year, would be Quan Martin. If Quan Martin blows up into a big-time player this year, he would be entering the final year of his rookie deal. And remember, there's no fifth-year option on him because he was not a first-round pick. But, take him out of the equation because we don't know what he's going to be like. You're really then talking about the guys who are among the highest-paid players on the team right now. Laramie Tunsil. Laramie Tunsil is 31 years old, but Laramie Tunsil's contract runs out after the 2026 season. You just traded a lot of draft capital for the guy that you believe will be your starting left tackle during this first window of Super Bowl contention with Jaden under a rookie deal. Is that just 2 more seasons of Tunsil? Doubt it. I'm sure, because that pit position has aged pretty well. Certainly into your mid-30s, you can play at a very high level. Tunsil's probably next. This time next year when the season ends, because you can start signing your own once the season ends. You don't have to wait for, March, the league calendar to begin. I would say that Tunsil is probably the next big deal they have to worry about. Who else? Well, if Duran goes out and has a big year, he's going to, he's got to view this as kind of a contract year like he had, in 2022, because he's got 1 year left on his deal after this year. But it is a major cap hit savings if they were to release him after this year or trade him after this year. He could meet John Allen's fate if he does not have a big year. Keep in mind, Deron Payne is entering his age 28 season. Deron Payne still could prove to be a big-time player with a season this year. I know all of us would be talking about, right? If he goes out and has 11.5 sacks and ends up being a dominant player like he was in 2022, we would all be sitting here saying it's not worth paying him because we see what happens when he's not, in a contract year. But it's very possible, given his age, if he performs at a high level in 2025, that he would be on the list next year because he'd have only 1 year remaining on his deal. Now, they may, with a guy like Duran, say, no, we're going to make you play out that final year on the deal. But they may have compelling reasons to extend him and to get some cap savings benefits next year. By the way, Washington, because of all of their 1 year deals, are in great cap position heading forward. They're top 5 for the next 3 years in available cap space. And that's because they have all of these 1 year contracts. Who else would be on the list? I'll give you a guy, Frankie Louvu. Frankie Louvu at 29 years old, if he has another season like he had last year or even better in 2025, he does have 1 year left on his deal in 2026, but it might be one of those situations that they would look to extend him before 2026. That's a possibility. A Dorrance Armstrong is sort of in the same boat. A Tyler Biotish is still in the same boat. Those were guys that signed 3 year deals, so they've got another year after this one. But if they end up playing at a high level and the team thinks they're worth keeping, you figure it out and get it done next off season. But what this really reveals when you go through this, like they paid Cosme last year. They obviously a guy like Kinlaw this year. They extended Bates, remember. Allegretti still got a year left on his deal. But, when you look at their roster, it's significant change year to year because of all of these one-year deals. Now, they ended up bringing back several of their one-year guys. Wagner, Ertz, Igbenogany. I'm forgetting somebody. They also let a bunch of one-year guys walk, Crowder and others they let walk after one-year deals last year. Their slot receiver from the Falcons, they let walk. Zacchaeus, they let walk. They let somebody else walk that I'm forgetting. But they brought back, a guy like McNichols. They brought back, as I said, Wagner and Ertz. A lot of their, roster in terms of players that are under contract beyond next year are all rookies. That's a good situation to be in, to have some control over your young players. But, man, you look at this roster, and there aren't a lot of so-called cornerstone contracts. Terry's will be one. Tunsil's will be one. And, obviously, Jaden's contract will be one. But after that, not many. They're going to have to, turn the next cornerstone contracts out of the players they've drafted. Connerly Jr., but that's down the road. A guy like Amos, certainly a guy like Sanders still, who is proven, after 1 year to be a guy that we will be keeping our eye on in terms of getting a big contract down the road. You'd certainly hope that Johnny Newton would emerge into a really good player that you could, get excited about paying. By the way, that, potential off season is one of the reasons you can't be going crazy with a player that's entering his 30s right now. Because in 2027, January of 2027, you'll have Jaden, you'll have Sanders still, and you may have Johnny Newton. You may have a guy like Brandon Coleman that you want to keep because he's established himself as a really solid guard in the league. So there's going to be a lot, going down the road. But as of now, when you look at like what's next after Terry, it gives you an idea that the roster is not loaded with cornerstone players at this point. They may be coming, and we certainly have one at quarterback. But they're in good shape too. That's the benefit of all these one-year deals is they've got plenty of cap flexibility. They've become a place that doesn't turn people away. They've actually become a magnet for players. So they'll have a lot of flexibility moving forward. I don't know. I thought it was, just the idea that this Terry deal gets done and then it's like, what's next? Really, the big one is Jaden's. But this time next year, Tunsil will have to get paid. If he ends up being the player that they think they got in the trade, hopefully a quicker answer to that than they got with Marshawn Lattimore. I didn't even mention Lattimore. Lattimore counts very little cap-wise and payment-wise for the next couple of years. So it's not a bad situation, but that also means that it's not, a situation that they'd be afraid to run from, if they, kind of ultimately determine he was not the player they thought they had traded for. All right, couple of things NBA-wise. David Aldridge at 12. Dan Quinn will speak to the media. We'll try to carry as much of that live as we can next hour. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the team980.com.
All right, minicamps are underway across the NFL. Notable minicamp absences include Terry McLaurin and TJ Watt, who are both attempting to secure extensions, and then Jalen Ramsey and Trey Hendrickson are both working towards trades with their teams. Laramie Tunsil and Marshawn Lattimore are both present in Ashburn for Commanders minicamp. And today, with reports circling that the Knicks are preparing a tsunami-type deal for Giannis Antetokounmpo, ESPN's Brian Windhorst has responded, quote, "Right now, there are no Giannis Antetokounmpo trade markets. There is no Giannis Antetokounmpo trade discussions. He has not asked for it. The Bucks are not looking to trade him." This morning, according to USA Today, Colorado head football coach Deion Sanders is currently dealing with a health issue and has stepped away from the team for the moment. The Washington Nationals have recalled infielder Andre Chaparro from AAA Rochester on Tuesday and optioned Nassim Nunez to AAA Rochester in the corresponding move. The Nats will take on the Mets tonight at 7:10. Mackenzie Gore on the bump. Nats on deck at 6:40 with Charlie and Dave on 106.7 The Fan. This update is sponsored by the Team 980 YouTube page. Just open the app, type in the Team 980, and hit subscribe. Kevin Sheehan is live from 10 to 1 and Craig Hoffman from 4 to 7. Don't forget to like the stream and turn on notifications to stay up to date on all things DC sports. And that's what's trending.
Game 3 of the NBA Finals tomorrow night. So they've had these 2 days of rest in between games here to start. Then we go Friday, Sunday after Wednesday night for games 4 and 5. Tyrese Halliburton has, certainly attracted a lot of the conversation during these playoffs because of his incredible clutch play at the end of 4 or 5 games. Is he a superstar? Isn't he? I can't put him into that superstar category. And the reasons are pretty obvious. In game 2 on Sunday night, in the first half, as they were falling behind by 23, he had 3 points and 3 assists on 1 of 5 shooting. In game 1 in the first half, he had 6 points and 3 assists on 2 of 4 shooting in the first half. He was great down the stretch when they needed him, including hitting the game winner, but that's not superstar play. He's had, and I went through the list yesterday, a lot of very subpar games in the postseason, and he's had some terrific games. He's a very good player. I just can't put him into the superstar category. I can't do it. He said about his performances in game 1 and game 2, he said, they're really good defensively. By the way, he was walking with what ESPN.com described as a noticeable limp after his post-game press conference on Sunday night. He said they've got a lot of different guys who can guard the ball, fly around. I just have to figure out how to be better earlier in games. Kudos to them. They're a great defensive team, but I will watch the film and see where I can get better, closed quote. Yeah, he's got to be better. What we've seen, look, game 1 was an absolute shocker. It was strange. It was stunning. And then game 2 wasn't. And the games were very similar in the way they sort of went through the first, 47 minutes. It's just that Indiana got lights out hot at the end and ended up stealing game 1. The lead that Oklahoma City had in game 1 was hovering in that 10 to 15 range, whereas the lead in game 2 was more in that 16 to 22, 23 point range. A little bit harder to make a big run when you're down 18 versus down, 10 or 12. Oklahoma City's better. They're a lot better. And there's only one way Indiana can steal another game or 2 to really extend this series, in my opinion. And that is to make a lot of shots. And when I say a lot of shots, make a lot of threes. And a lot of them would be contested. I just don't see any other way they can win this series without winning the 3-point shooting, battle. Because the Thunder are better everywhere else. They're bigger. They are. They've got a better creator and superstar who is, a guy that can essentially get to wherever he wants to get to. And by the way, can name his number before the game starts. SGA is now in that category. Like, hey, we need 38 from you tonight. He'll go get 38. We need 28 and a few more assists. He can do that. I just don't see any way Indiana wins this series without being lights out from the 3-point line like they were in game 1 at 18 to 39. And that requires them making a lot of contested threes too, because they are facing really one of the best defensive teams we have seen in the NBA Finals in years. 14 of 40 behind the arc in game 2, 18 to 39 in game 1. That's a big, if they can shoot 18 of 39, 18 to 38, if they can make 4 or 5 more threes in a game, shoot closer to, 47, 48%, they're going to be in the game with a chance to steal it. They're not going to win any of these games big. I say that, and Oklahoma City basically went to sleep at Minnesota when they were up 2-0 in game 3 and got absolutely trounced. But Minnesota's a better team than Indiana. They just are. Indiana, to win another game or 2 or to, shock the world and win this series, because they are once again a minus, they're a big underdog. Minus 550 is Oklahoma City right now. They're a 5.5-point favorite on the road tomorrow night. For them to win, more than another game, they're going to have to shoot lights out from behind the arc. They can't They can't dominate the paint because they're not as big. They're not as strong. They have a real difficult time running half-court offense against Oklahoma City's defense. They're going to have to hit a lot of contested threes, or this series is going to go quickly, I think. David Aldridge joins us next. We'll talk some NBA. Dan Quinn next hour. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980, theteam980.com. We're free and live on the Odyssey app. Dan Quinn expected to speak this hour before mandatory minicamp day number 1. We'll carry a lot of that towards the back half of this hour. Joining me right now, David Aldridge. Of course, David writes for The Athletic, and David was a big part of all of those TNT years and saw a lot of those highlights in their final days doing the NBA. At David Aldridge DC on X, on Twitter. You tweeted something the other day that I either retweeted or liked. You said, never cared about people who have already decided before a series that they won't watch for whatever reason. Don't care what their reasons are. Don't want them on the boat. If you love hoops, you'll love this series, period. And I love hoops. Why do you love this series?
Because these are the two best teams in the league, and they've been outstanding for not just days, but for months now. You know, OKC's been the best team in the league all season, and the Pacers, I don't know what the exact record is, but something like 45-14 since New Year's Day or something like that. I mean, they've been outstanding, the second half of the season and throughout the playoffs. And excellence should be something to celebrate, not to denigrate. And so I can't waste time with people who are not going to seriously, evaluate how good a player Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is or what a clutch player Tyrese Halliburton is because they don't play in New York or LA or whatever your favorite big media market is. That's insane. You don't care about the game. You just care about your Knicks or your Lakers or whatever. I care about the game. I love the game of basketball. I love to see it played well. The standard to me is the 2014 San Antonio Spurs. They played as good a team basketball series against a really good Miami team with LeBron at the height of his, powers, and blew them off the floor in 5 games. And that's the standard to me. And that, the Spurs are in one of the smallest media markets in the country. I don't care. If that's where the best basketball is being played, who cares where they play it? Enjoy the game, enjoy what you're watching, because players this good and teams this good are not common. So you should enjoy it instead of criticizing it.
I'm with you 100%, and I've loved this entire postseason, and I'm enjoying this series as well. I want to come back to this series in a moment and talk about how great Oklahoma City is, but what are we seeing right now, David, in the NBA, on the verge of a 7th consecutive different champion than the 6 years that preceded it? This was a league of dynastic runs of the same kinds of teams involved. Why are we seeing this, and what's ahead?
Well, this is socially engineered by the league. I mean, they have made, they have made what they call competitive advantage, but is basically parity, their goal. And they have jerry-rigged the system to ensure, or to make it all but impossible, really, to build a team and to maintain a team through the old-fashioned method of let's find 2 or 3 superstars and play them together. And we'll be able to, because we're willing to pay the tax, we can buy contracts and essentially buy contracts from players, veteran players who want to come play for us. We're a little expensive, but who don't make a ton of money. And we'll pay the tax on that. We don't mind doing it as long as we can keep the party going. So what made the Golden States of the world great? Obviously, it was Steph and it was Clay, but they could always bring in, whether it was an Iguodala or a Sean Livingston, or David West, they could always bring in another vet, right? To just do vet things for 10 or 12 minutes a game and let the superstar shine. You can't do that anymore under this system. The tax is so regressive. The tax is so punitive, and it's not just the tax. It is the restrictions on trades. It's the restriction on draft picks if you're a second apron team for more than a couple of years. And it's impossible. It's just impossible to operate as a second apron team for very long. Even the Celtics, the most storied franchise in the history of this league, they're not only are they selling the team because of the just incredible luxury tax payments that they have, which really impacts the families in terms of their ability to pass their wealth on to their kids, but they are going to break up their team that just won the NBA championship last year. And they're not doing it because those guys can't play anymore. They're doing it because it's too expensive. They can't keep it together. They cannot keep that team together and pay that kind of tax. And you add to that Tatum's injury, of course. But even before Tatum got hurt, they were going in that direction. And that's just what this system is designed to do. And so the teams that normally would be at the top and be willing to spend whatever it took, nobody can do it for very long. You just can't do it. You can't pay that much tax and have your picks frozen. Like, there's no way you can build a team. There's no way you can maintain a good team. So that's why you have so much turnover from year to year in terms of who the best teams are.
Yeah, it's ironic that the NFL and Pete Rozelle sort of designed a system for parity, and yet the most dynastic run we saw two iterations of it with the Patriots in the 21st century. But basketball, yes, is heading in that direction. But I want to know if you still agree with something that I know we've talked about before. Even in this new era, it's still, to me, to win an NBA title requires a top five-ish superstar player. We have not had since the 2004 Pistons a team win the title without having a debatable top five superstar lead the way. Do you think that is still a requirement moving forward? Now, if the Pacers win, and I don't think they will, that would break the trend. But obviously, if Oklahoma City wins, the trend continues. What do you say?
Right. I mean, it's always easier to build a championship team around a top 10, top 5 player. It's not a coincidence, to your point, that each of these 7 different champions, each of these 6 different champions had a first ballot Hall of Fame player on their roster that they could build around. The problem is there's not many of those to go around. So a lot of teams, and Indiana is a perfect example of that, have decided that they are going to try and build teams obviously around their best player. And Halliburton is, a very good player, maybe a great player. But it's much more about the strength of numbers that the Warriors used to talk about, their depth, basically. You have to have a lot of depth. And teams are going more the depth route now. We're going to try and build a team where we can play 9, 10, 11 guys comfortably and incredibly during the regular season. And maybe that gets reduced to 8 or 9 during the playoffs. But we're going to roll as many guys out there as we can to try and make up for a perhaps perceived talent deficit. And it's just more economical, right? Again, to the earlier point about parity. So the Pacers getting to the finals, I think, and to a certain degree, the Knicks. I mean, Brunson's their best player. Brunson's an all NBA player. Is he top 5 in the league? Probably not. Realistically, but he's top 15. So the goal may be now, Kevin, let's get a top 15 player and see if we can put enough guys around him and be intentional about how we build a team around him that we can compete at the higher levels. And I think that's what you're going to see more of in the coming years.
Talking to David Aldridge before we get back to these NBA finals, I've talked about you got to be patient when it comes to our team here, the Wizards. But ultimately, they're going to have to get it right on a couple of big time, players. Like you said, maybe it's a top 15 with another 2 or 3 top 15 guys on the team. But how do you feel about, this new era of the Wizards basketball 2 years into this venture?
I mean, obviously, look, this was a crushing disappointment for them. They were, I wouldn't say they were, and you can't anticipate, it's the lottery. You can't anticipate you're going to get the top 2 pick, but they certainly were hopeful, and they were clear that they were going to tank this season in the hopes that they could get a top 3 pick. And did everything to try and make that possible. And 6 is, no matter how they spend it, is an awful result. Just awful. It's just terrible. Now, having said that, you can't whiff on 6. You can't just throw your hands up and say, well, there's no good players. No. You're going to go all the way in on a rebuild like they're doing and go all the way to the bottom. You can't miss on draft picks ever. That's the Oklahoma City model. Is that we're going to take so many swings at this that even if we miss 1 or 2, we're going to hit some home runs. The Wizards have yet to hit a home run. I don't see it yet. I think some of their guys have a chance to be good role players, but I don't think there's anybody on this roster yet that's the guy that you go, wow, he's going to be. So whether they stay at 6 or they try to move up a couple of spots through a trade, they got to get somebody that's impactful this year, and they got to get somebody that's impactful next year, like a real guy that you can build around. I happen to think Trey Johnson's a real guy you can build around. I should say every team in the league. Most teams in the league have a guy like Trey Johnson, whether it's, Devin Booker or Jamal Murray, neither of whom were top 5 picks, right? You need a guy that can just go get you a bucket. That's what this league is about. Guys, you still need guys that can get you a bucket. And Trey Johnson can get you a bucket. And so to me, however, I don't know where he falls in the draft because I don't know what Philly's
somewhere
doing
around
at 3.
there. Somewhere
I don't know
around
what
6.
Philly's doing at 3. If Philly keeps the pick, maybe I don't think they would take him, but somebody might try to trade up to get him. That's my point. So you may have to trade up to 3 to get him. I don't know, but that's the type of guy I think would be an impactful guy for the Wizards at 6 if they stay there. You could also go. There's another thing that teams are doing now. More teams are going bigger than ever. Everybody wants to play with 2 bigs. You see Oklahoma City does it with Hartenstein and with Holmgren. You could make a case for taking Malawach at 6. You could. If you think Sarr is not a long-term answer at center, and he may not be, and you want to take a real center and move Sarr to the 4, and you're 7-1 and 7-2 in the back, that's a strategy. We'll see. I don't know if it'll work, but that makes sense the way the league is going right now.
It really would have been, and I'm sure you contemplated this as well, but if they had landed at number 1, even if Flagg, way down the road proved to be just a good player and not a transcendent player, immediately the Wizards would have become relevant. And it's been so long since they've been relevant. And actually, with that in mind, and we'll come back to the NBA Finals, I just wanted to mention something that I mentioned to Tommy the other day, to Lavera the other day. The other night on Monumental, David, they had Game 7 of the 78 NBA Finals on, as it was broadcast by CBS with Musburger and Rick Barry on the call. Have you watched that game on YouTube ever?
Oh, sure. I watched it live when I was 13 years old.
Well, I know that. We both did. But have you watched the replay at any point in the last several years? Because it's available on YouTube.
Yeah, no, I've seen it. I've seen a few. I watched a few of their playoff games in that 78, 77, 78, 79 stretch. Go back and look at it. And
what strikes you about the basketball then versus now?
Oh, God, it's a completely different game.
So different.
That was pre-3-point line. They didn't even have a 3-point line.
There's that.
So, everything was in the paint. There was 10 feet in the paint. You know what I mean? Like every 20 feet in the paint, both teams. So it's a completely different game. It's like pre-World War II baseball. It's a completely different game. I mean, you watch it for the entertainment value, but you understand that there's nothing that anchors that era of basketball to this era of basketball. But it was fun watching Charles Johnson hit a half-court shot at the end of the third quarter.
Almost 3/4 court.
Yeah, and Kupchak's 3-point play, which was the biggest play of that Game 7. So. That was fun. It's always fun to go back and look at, an era where the Wizards' bullets were actually good.
Of course, the NBA wasn't even that relevant in that moment. But you know what? So what struck me, and you didn't say this, but the differences in the way the game was played, obviously, because of no 3-point line. But I'm telling you, man, the skill difference is just so significantly different. I mean. Sure. The players of today, forget the athleticism conversation, evolution, the whole thing. The skill level is just so much greater. I think it's so much greater now than it was even 25 years ago. But you go back 48 years ago, and it is completely different.
Yeah, I mean, I think too many times, Kevin, people kind of conflate skill level with, are they good basketball players?
Yeah.
The skill level is off the charts. Yes, they can. Their dribbling is better. Their shooting is better.
No. Fair.
All of that's
fair.
Better.
Yes.
But are they better basketball players? That's my kind of bottom line. Some of them are. Some of them are not. So that's where I am on it. So I I can't like unilaterally say the game is just better now because they're more skilled. Some of them are very much more skilled, and some of them are great basketball players, but some of them aren't. And so you have to kind of take that with a grain of salt, I think.
All right. Let's get back to what's at hand. I never let the regular season sort of make me think that it's just going to be an extension, because I think the playoffs are a completely different product altogether in the NBA. But man, Oklahoma City, David, I mean, even though, you kind of have to earn your way historically to an NBA championship, you win one series year one, two the next. I mean, this has been the best team of the postseason. I'm not even sure it's close. Talk about how great this team is, and maybe even put it in terms of some recent historical context.
Well, you can just go back to last year. The Celtics,
True, and 17-3 in the postseason, yeah.
Well, yes, but also regular season. So you add them up and see what their record was. And the Celtics record was I think was 80-21 if you add the playoffs. So, and that made them and I looked this up. So I wrote this after they won. They were the 10th greatest team of all time. If you look at total win percentage of regular season and playoffs, because they go 63, or maybe they were 81-20.
64-18, and they were 16-3 in the postseason. So they were 80-21.
80-21. So, OKC won 68-14. And it went 3. I'm going by losses always. They lost 3. They lost none. I can't. But anyway.
They've lost 5 so far. 3 to Denver, 1 to Minnesota, 1 to Indiana.
Yeah, they're on pace to be somewhere, or if they win 16 and win the championship, they will be at 84 and whatever. That will make them one of the most successful teams in the history of basketball. Period. End of sentence. They'll be a top 10 team of all time if you add regular season and playoff wins. So their defense is, I've said this, and I will write about it at some point, hopefully before the series is over. I hate comparing eras because people bring their own biases to it, but I do believe that they are comparable to the first Bulls three-peat championship team. That was not the Rodman years. That was the Horace Grant years, because that team was incredibly athletic defensively. Their ability
the team
to
that beat the Lakers in the final for his first.
Correct. That's right. And then beat Portland and then beat Phoenix for the first three. Right. Because Jordan was still at that point a great on-ball defender. He, as he got older, he was not quite as great on ball, but he was still smart and knew how to play team defense. Pippen was lethal defensively, and Horace Grant was terrific defensively. So his ability to hedge, to hedge on a pick and roll, to force it back to the middle and then get back to his man to recover was amazing, and they were connected. They just, all 5 guys were connected. This team reminds me of that team. Their ability to play 5 defensive players together, their ability to switch, the ability to contest. Obviously they get their hands on everything. They're very aggressive. But it's not so much their hands, it's their feet and their ability to move and to take space away and to take driving lanes away and to make people one-dimensional. It's remarkable. Their defense is sensational. It's not good. It's sensational. And assuming that they win this series, and I do think they will win it. I think it will take 6 games, but I think they'll win it. They'll be one of the best defensive teams in the modern era. Absolutely. Caruso is just a Swiss Army knife. You just put him on anybody, and he doesn't shut them down, but he really makes them inefficient. Like, he really makes them inefficient. The defense he played on Jokic in that series was insane.
Yeah.
In terms of giving away 70 pounds and 6 inches, whatever it is, and they've got, multiple guys. Dort is a linebacker playing in the NFL. Like, he's physical, but he moves his feet so well. He takes charges. He's diving on the floor for loose balls. They're really good. Shea is a really solid, good defensive player. They're not hunting him. You can't hunt him. Like Indiana hunted Brunson in the conference finals. You can't hunt Shea. like he's pretty good. Like you're not going to get a lot out of that, you know. So and then they got size in the back, you know, with Hartenstein, who's more of a space eater, not really a lockdown guy, but Holmgren's a great shot blocker, really good weak side shot blocker, you know. So they get you at multiple levels. It's really hard to score against this team consistently. They're really good. So that's where I would say they are one of the better teams of this era. I think if they go ahead and finish this thing off.
Yeah, I mean, well said. I can't remember a defensive team in the postseason like this one. I don't think I've ever seen a half of defense like the half they played in game one against the Pacers. And, it's not just their starting five. Basically, they're like 10 players, any five on the floor, they can switch 1 through 5 and shut you down. It's so impressive to watch. So you gave me your prediction the rest of the way. You like the Thunder. You like Indiana to win one more game. I'll finish up with this because this is a topic du jour for those of us that are paying attention to it. But what is Tyrese Halliburton to you?
He's a really good player, Kevin. And look, you can't go on a run that he's going on and say it's luck or a fluke or whatever that. No, he's made 4 game-winning shots or game-tying shots in the last 2 seconds of regulation. 4 times in the playoffs. That's not luck. All right, that's a guy that's confident and can get to his spot and takes difficult shots under duress. He is if he's not a top 5 player in this league, you can certainly make an argument he's a top 10 player in this league. They play off of him. They feed off of him. They need his energy. He has this habit of kind of disappearing because he's trying to get other people involved. I don't think he has the luxury of doing that in this series. I think he's got to be intentional about getting to the rim and pushing the pace and getting, not just getting other guys' shots, but taking it to the basket and getting to the foul line. They feed off of his energy. And I think that's why I think the Pacers will win at least one more game in this series because he'll play better. He's always followed clunkers with really good games the next game. He had a clunker the other night. He will play better tomorrow. They will play better tomorrow. I think they will win game 3, and then game 4 will be the series. Whoever wins that game wins the series. And I happen to think it'll be Oklahoma City, but we'll see. We'll see.
Appreciate you doing this. Follow David on X at David Aldridge DC. His book with John Hollinger came out late in the fall of this past year. It's called The Basketball 100, the story of the greatest players in NBA history. Appreciate you doing this. Enjoy the rest of it. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it, man.
David Aldridge, everybody. Dan Quinn set to speak out in Ashburn prior to mandatory minicamp day number 1. We'll carry that for you. You'll hear it coming up. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980, theteam980.com. You can download the Odyssey app and listen to us wherever you are, whenever you want. You can watch the show now on the Team 980's YouTube page. Hit the subscribe button when you get there. mandatory thing in this offseason is minicamp. It seems like all of the NFL teams are holding their minicamp at the same time. Dan Quinn is speaking before they take the field right now. We take you out to Ashburn so you can hear the head coach.
This energy of the newest ones combined with the, guys going into year 2 and the jump they're going to make. It was, made for an interesting couple of days. So I thought I'd share that with you. And we'll get started. Questions about the camp and getting rocking.
Obviously, Terry not here. How does that affect you guys just in terms of planning these sessions? And is there at all any concern that it could affect the offense as a whole down the road as they really build that rapport together?
Sure. And the good news is lots of rapport has been built. And so those are all the times and, hours and hours upon doing that. Hey, sometimes football and business, they intersect. And this is one of those times. Terry is a fantastic teammate and really puts in the work and spent a lot of time with him already this offseason. So, but let's, the business side of things, Adam and their crew and Terry and his group, they'll let them work through that. But in the meantime, lots of stuff to do. And we try to customize as much as we can, Nikki, who can do what, who's in rehab, who can do some things, who can do everything, who needs to see more during this time of year, and who do we need to see less. And so this is one of those times you're really able to customize the script and the work to do that.
Brandon Coleman, as you've kind of just moved him around like you're moving around other guys, how has he kind of adapted and adjusted as you've done that?
Yeah, really coming into it, because he had good versatility coming out of TCU, the move inside, he was ready to begin that process early. So it started prior to him even getting to the off-season program in his training, working on different sets to do that. So even getting to the off-season program in his training, working on different sets to do that. So he's a rare guy because he's got the width and the bulk to play inside, but the athleticism to play outside. But he's really locked in on the techniques that it'll take. And so for the big guys, they don't get to fully express that until the training camp, just by the nature of their positions. But he's done an excellent job of getting the timing and the footwork and the sets in that he can.
I know you prefer to talk about guys who are out there and all that, but I am curious with the Terry situation, is there something you've learned over the years how to deal with these kind of situations and how maybe even things leading up to it to make sure things are okay from?
Yeah, I think it's why, that we all have, people that can help on that side. So I can have the relationship as the coach and the ball player and the man. And so, just keep a cool head about it and, keep communication up, which, Terry and I certainly do. So I think the main thing, expect the expected. Sometimes the business and football can get contentious and difficult, but it never has to be with the people that are inside the locker room and doing that. And so I've learned that, through the years, and easy advice to follow.
Laramie and Marshawn are here this week.
Correct.
What are you expecting to see from them, especially with Marshawn coming off like the hamstring stuff and all that?
Yeah, like I was saying earlier, a little bit customized, John, who will do what, how much we'll get. So, and it'll kind of depend on the day as well, what we want to feature and where we're at. But, they're both doing good and pumped they're here and getting rolling with us. So they're really I've enjoyed, spending time with them here. Like for Marshawn, when it's traded, it's in season, it's already intense. And so it's in a different atmosphere. You get to have some good conversations. And same with Laramie from the trade to get him here. I got a chance to meet, his family, when he arrived here. And so not every time you get to do that. So, I took that time to spend time with, his son and his family. Like that was a good deal for me to get a chance to spend time with him. I got to know his why maybe before he even got here and got into the locker room.
Dan, this may be in line with your customization for the workout for these guys. Is Marshawn a full participant this week?
He'll get quite a bit, but I'll see where it goes after today, and do we need to see how much tomorrow? But I would say full participant going into it. What does that mean for everybody? A little bit different, Ben, but there's no restrictions going in.
Gotcha. And the idea of these off-season programs has changed over time. You get less work. What for you has maybe changed? I don't know if it's from your Atlanta days or just other times of what this week actually means and what the ultimate goal kind of is out of this week.
Yeah, and it's a lot different, and I think that's the change is good. Obviously we're doing it to help the players and go to it for, as some of you may remember, like way back, the mandatory camp came right after the draft. 2 practices, 1. So it was 5 practices in a weekend. I don't know what load management or those kind of things would say about that nowadays, but it probably wouldn't be too favorable. But I do know that you want to isolate the skills, Ben, and see where we're at. And then the rookies have been here about 1 month. And so for them and for the players that are going into year 2, what's the learning like? Have you applied, what we've learned in this time together so you can really, let it go once you get, into training camp? And so like there'll be a natural break that'll come up, 2 or 3 days from now. And there's almost like a 40 days before you get to training camp and having a real plan for what that looks like. But in this space, I always like to see the newest players and their acclimation, where they're at. And it kind of gives you a little test, a little barometer where they're at mentally and, regarding the playbook and that. To do the whole factors, physically, mentally, emotionally, like all the things you have to pour into it. But it's a good, I would say just a good test. Where are you exactly with the knowledge of it all?
Hey, good afternoon, Coach.
Good afternoon.
Kind of speaking actually to like how things evolve. If you had one kind of overarching, obviously can't be very specific, but goal for this mini camp for your team, what would that be?
Well, number one, like always, like the health of the team. I love seeing the communication on all 3 phases, because if we can get that part right, I know the contact and those things will take place, but you have to have the communication down at a really, really strong level. And so I want to hear it. I want to feel that all the way through in all 3 phases, knowing that's kind of giving you information as the teacher that the student knows it. Oftentimes, I know if there was been in classroom where there was good teaching that went on, but we don't know if there was good learning. Those lecture halls that we were like for a long time, and then okay, I don't know, I wrote some things down, I might have missed a half hour there somewhere. Like when the communication happened. So that's what I like to listen for.
You're listening to Dan Quinn out at Minicamp live here on the Team 980.
Where exactly thoughts? I know there's like some question kind of out here, like where exactly you guys are going to employ him. I know you don't want to give that away, obviously, but just some general thoughts on his skill set.
Yeah. Number one, he's got a lot of experience at some outside backer, and being on the edge, we'll feature more into that. He's got a good special teams background as well, but we'll feature him on the edge and outside linebacker kind of roles. And then on teams, I really think it's probably 3 or 4 out of the core. And he's off to a good start here. I've really enjoyed connecting with him, Dietrich, Jonathan Jones, JK, to name just a few, of getting to know them and who they are. And so that's been an important part for me through this offseason.
Coach, hi. If I could just ask you one more thing about Terry. Obviously, we know what he's done on the field in terms of numbers. You touched on it a little bit at the beginning, but in terms of his intangibles, especially for the rest of the wide receiver room, what do you think that he has brought to that particular wideout room?
Well, for a long time, there's really, really high standards, of what a professional can be. I can think back to one of the things he was working on last training camp, and I remember standing with Adam. He was working on low catches, so they were like either stationary or running catches that were below the knee, and it's like that type of specific throws after practice that were down towards his feet. That's a pro's pro, where he was finding the smallest of detail to get better at, not the catch that's right here. And he was already exceptional at tracking the deep ball and looking over his shoulder. So I love when people are finding a specific thing. I want to work on that thing to get better at. I think Terry, that was like a clear demonstration of that. It may sound like a small thing, but that's really, like finding the edge to say, what can I, work on?
And one more thing, you said you spent a lot of time with the rookies. Obviously, that's such a tough transition, I think, for any player to come from college to the pro level. What do you hope that they take away from this particular minicamp in this time period that they've had?
I want them to know that the process that they're going through is normal, and I want them to fail successfully some, knowing that there's going to be mistakes, and this is the only way they know if this technique that we're teaching is going to work. If you don't do that, you're really shortchanging yourself, because the way Jason Simmons may teach a specific technique may be new to them, and then all of a sudden it just clicks. And okay, but you do have to apply it and try it to go. And At the end of it, I think you need to show them belief. I think that is powerful when you're seeing them do it. I don't think it can be just blind, hey, you're going to be great, and then not showing all the work that has to go into it. But knowing that there's a process that all the people have gone through, and early they were guarded. I don't know what it's going to be like here. They'd heard, okay, the people will look after you, meaning the other players, to help you grow. And so I think that helped, knowing, like, one of the questions I ask is, who's made a big impact on you since you've been here? And so many times you hear it's this player, this player. Sometimes it might have been somebody they sat next to in the locker room, but not at the same position. And so it kind of gives me a little test too, to know who's already making an impact as they're going. So it is a question, like during these meetings over the last few days. But it's a hard process for them. They're realizing all of the reps matter. They don't get a lot of them. So when I can deliver, I'll get some more. So it's like step by step as it's going.
Are there any tweaks or adjustments you've made to minicamp, even from last year?
Not necessarily as much from last year. We're still working game management situations. We probably worked a little more third down and no huddle. And I would say maybe, because now we've been through, to say we emphasized more of the third down this offseason. So that's probably a byproduct of that, where last year it was, we're not going to miss one step of the installation, one step of that. So maybe a little more customized this time around.
Hey, Coach, I know you mentioned the players who are in year two and seeing their growth. So what are you looking to see from the veterans on the team who are new to the team this year?
Yeah, that's onboarding as well. And we had talked about some of the guys who had come in. They're different than the rookies. This is their first year in the system, and it's everybody else's second year. And so over that time, have they learned, the standards we've set? Have they learned the techniques that we want? And so that's why being a part of the off-season program is a good one, because there's a lot of peer-to-peer coaching that takes place. I may say it, or Cliff may say it, or Joe in a meeting room, or Larry. But then it's like, hey, here's what Dan or here's what Joe or Cliff are saying. And, like, that's, to me, where the leading takes place, not just from what I say, but when they're sharing it from one another. I can remember a conversation with Nick Ballore earlier today that he had already connected with a couple of people, about certain techniques or things they were doing, and that lets me know that we're in the right spot to do things.
Hey, Coach, in talking to some of the defensive coaches last week, they said that they left a lot of meat on the bone. So when you look at the front of the defense, there's a lot of new faces there.
Yep.
Are you seeing them mash together in this early stage?
Yeah, Don, it's a good question, and one they've been very intentional about. Even in the meetings times where there's so many times the front seven are all together, whether it's linebackers or D-line, all of them kind of doing things together. I like the way that Joe has split up a lot of the teaching, even in a walkthrough setting. This is the blitz package. It's all going together. These are the run game. And so they've done a lot together. And so I have seen that mesh take place, but it was very intentional, I thought, by the staff as well. And I think that's what it should be, from, like, if the staff are asking the players to improve, then as a staff, we also need to improve, because otherwise I think then we'd be shortchanging the players, like myself included. So elevating the players is also elevating the staff. And if we can all do that together, then we can really go after it. But yeah, they were very intentional about meshing that together with the front. All right.
Out in
See you tomorrow.
Ashburn, they're
Thank you.
getting ready for minicamp day number 1. Minicamp scheduled for 3 consecutive days, today, tomorrow, and Wednesday. I think he will be speaking tomorrow as well. There were a couple of things that he said there, including answering that last question that I want to follow up on. And we will do that right after these words from a few of our sponsors. It is the Kevin Sheehan Show on thekevinsheehanshow.com.
All right, minicamps are underway across the NFL. Notable minicamp absences include Terry McLaurin and TJ Watt, who are both attempting to secure extensions. Laramie Tunsil and Marshawn Lattimore are both present in Ashburn for Commanders minicamp this week. And with reports that the Knicks are preparing a tsunami-type deal, ESPN's Brian Windhorst has responded, quote, Right now, there is no Giannis Antetokounmpo trade market. There is no Giannis Antetokounmpo trade discussions. He has not asked for it. The Bucks are not looking to trade him. And according to USA Today, Colorado head football coach Deion Sanders is currently dealing with a health issue and has been away from the team for some time. The Washington Nationals have recalled Andre Chaparro from AAA Rochester on Tuesday and have sent down Nasim Nunez. The Nats will play tonight. They take on the Mets at 7:10. Mackenzie Gore expected to be on the bump. Nats on deck at 6:40 with Charlie and Dave on the Fan. This update is sponsored by the Team 980 YouTube page. Just open the app, type in the Team 980 and hit subscribe. Kevin Sheehan is live from 10 to 1 and Craig Hoffman from 4 to 7. Don't forget to like the stream and turn on notifications to stay up to date on all things DC sports. And that is what's trending.
From my guy Seth in Potomac, he writes, Kevin, Jaden's new deal will be backloaded when we get there, so there shouldn't be a link to Terry's deal now. Yeah, Seth, I get it. That's not necessarily what I was saying. First of all, I was answering an email from Carter, who wondered if they might be a bit cash poor right now. And I said it was worth contemplating. I don't believe that they are. But, the cash outlay over the last 2 years, the $6 billion for the team, the 75 to 100 for the stadium upgrade, to meet code. And yeah, for planning purposes, what's down the road in what will be more likely than not an expected all-time deal for Jaden Daniels when we get there. But as it relates to that, even if it were structured where it was back-end loaded for cap purposes, it doesn't change the need for cash when the new deal is finalized, if it's finalized in 2027, which, again, they don't have to do a deal in 2027. That's just the first opportunity for them to do a deal, because you can't do a deal with a player on a rookie deal until that player's completed his third year in the league. They don't have to do it then. I would imagine if he plays the way he played last year in the upcoming season and in 2026, they will. But I'm talking about more cash requirement, at signing rather than how it's structured from a cap standpoint. So thanks, though, for the email. Yeah, so there are a couple of things. First of all, that last question just about the defense. You look at their roster, it's very possible there will be 5 to 6, probably 5, though, new starters defensively. Will Harris looks like a starter. I would say certainly a combination of Kinlaw, Wise, Goldman, that'll probably produce at least 2 new starters. That's 3. You could certainly have one in Jonathan Jones, which is 4. You could have Jordan McGee as sort of part of the starting lineup mix. That's going to be interesting. That is the biggest concern. All of the conversations about this team, big picture going into 2025, at least as it stands now, subject to change once we get to the games, will they be better on defense than they were last year? Because they need to be. If they're not, their chances of winning the Super Bowl or getting to the Super Bowl aren't that great, because to get there, they're probably going to have to win more games than the Eagles, or at least finish in in an advantageous tiebreaker situation at the top of the division. So they get at least 1 game at home, if not 2. And if their defense is what it was last year or worse, they're not going to get there. I know what they overcame last year in terms of not being very good defensively, but it was also against, teams that aren't necessarily what they're going to face this year in terms of what the schedule looks like now. So I thought that was interesting. And then as it relates to the Terry questions, he said basically, business and football, sometimes I think the word that he used was sometimes they intersect. And this is one of those times. And he spoke glowingly about Terry, but then he came back in a follow-up question. And I thought he said something interesting, because I thought it was in some ways an admission, not that this is a surprise, but he said, and I'm paraphrasing, things, between the player and a portion of the organization, meaning the front office, can get, and he used the word contentious to describe it. But then in sort of this good cop, bad cop scenario that he laid out, he said, it doesn't have to be that way, though, between the player and the locker room, the player and the coaches, the player and the other players. It can be that way between player and front office, the negotiating team, but it doesn't have to be that way with the players or the coaches that, he deals with. And that's, that's a good cop, bad cop scenario that he's describing. But I thought it was interesting that he did use the word contentious, and I know that we kind of feel like that may be true off of the reporting last week, but he said, business and football can get contentious, but it doesn't have to be between me and Terry, head coach and Terry, or Terry's teammates and Terry. It can be that way between Terry, his agent, and those that he's negotiating with directly. It doesn't have to be with everybody else. All right, that is it for the day. Thanks to David Aldridge, who jumped on with us. Chris is next.